It was late, the kind of stillness that seems heavier than the day's silence. The kitchen was mostly dark, save for the muted glow of the street lamp outside. I stood at the sink, the cool water swirling around my hands as I washed the last of the dinner plates. The evening had unfolded like any other, her laughter echoing faintly down the hall, her light footsteps ascending the stairs for her nightly shower. Everything felt normal, or so I thought. Her purse was where it always was, draped over the back of the dining chair, looking as unassuming as a purse can look. I wasn't searching for anything when I picked it up, intending only to move it off the chair so I could clean. But as I lifted it, something small fluttered free from a partially unzipped pocket, a napkin, folded neatly. It wasn't unusual for her to keep things like that. She often stuffed old receipts, random scribbled notes, and tissues into the pockets of her bag. But this napkin was different. It didn't look crumpled or discarded. It seemed deliberate, as though it had been tucked away with purpose. I crouched down, picking it up from the floor, feeling the faint dampness of the kitchen tiles through my socks. I didn't think much of it as I unfolded it, expecting to see a quick grocery list or a reminder she'd jotted down and forgotten. Instead, I was greeted by a stain, a deep red mark pressed onto the paper, almost like a signature left behind. I froze. My eyes locked onto that lipstick smudge. It was vivid, bold, a color that demanded attention. And I knew it wasn't hers. She never wore red lipstick. She said it didn't suit her, that it was too loud, too out of character. She preferred soft pinks, gentle nudes, shades that matched her understated style. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was a red so striking it seemed to leap off the napkin. My pulse quickened. I stared at the mark as if it could explain itself. Why was it there? Why did she have it? It felt out of place, incongruous with everything I knew about her. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the napkin back, trying to smooth it out, trying to erase the unease spreading through me. I placed it back into the pocket where it came from, as though hiding it would make it disappear. But it didn't. The image stayed in my mind, as sharp as if I was still holding it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't even hers. Maybe someone at work had handed it to her, or it came from a restaurant we'd gone to. A mix-up. An accident. My logical mind tried to push the thought away, but something deeper, more instinctual, clung to it. It felt wrong. She came down the stairs a few minutes later, her robe cinched around her waist, her hair damp and glistening. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and light. "You're still up?" I nodded, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Just finishing up here." She smiled, the same warm, familiar smile that had always been enough to set my worries at ease. "Don't stay up too late," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips, bare of any color, felt soft against my skin. Then she turned and headed back upstairs. I watched her go, standing in the middle of the kitchen, feeling the chill of the night air drifting in through the window. I wanted to shake off the feeling that had settled over me, but the sight of that red lipstick stain stayed with me. It was like a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was trying to solve. Something about it didn't add up, didn't fit into the picture I thought I knew. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and told myself I was overthinking it. But as I switched off the kitchen light and climbed the stairs, that red mark seemed to follow me, vivid even in the darkness, a silent reminder that not everything in our normal, quiet life was as it seemed. I couldn't let it go. I tried, God, did I try, but no matter what I told myself, that red stain kept haunting me. Over breakfast, I found myself stealing glances at her lips, at the soft, natural shade I was so used to. No lipstick, no gloss, nothing that even came close to the vivid red I had seen the night before. She sipped her coffee, humming softly as she flipped through her tablet, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. "You're quiet this morning," she said, glancing up at me with a hint of concern. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "Didn't sleep great." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and familiar. "Maybe try going to bed earlier tonight?" "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I'll try that." Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer, as if she were searching for something, but then she smiled again and went back to reading. The moment passed, but the unease didn't. I spent the day trying to shake it off, diving into work and running errands, hoping that staying busy would drown out my thoughts. But every time I paused, even for a moment, the image of that lipstick stain resurfaced. I started playing back little moments in my mind, the time she'd gotten home a little later than usual, the occasional vague responses when I asked about her day. None of it had felt off at the time. But now, in hindsight, I couldn't help but wonder. Had she been seeing someone? Was there a reason she never wore that shade for me? The questions came in waves, each one more painful than the last. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated the doubt that had crept into my mind and taken hold. But once it was there, it was impossible to ignore. When she got home that evening, she greeted me with the same smile as always, her arms slipping around my waist as she kissed my cheek. "Hey, how was your day?" "Fine," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "How about yours?" "Busy," she said with a sigh. "I'm so glad it's the weekend. I just want to relax." She pulled away and headed to the living room, dropping her bag on the couch. I hesitated, my eyes flicking toward the bag as she walked away. Part of me wanted to check it again, to see if that napkin was still there. But another part of me felt sick at the thought. If I looked again, what would it mean? That I didn't trust her? That I was the kind of person who went through his partner's things behind her back? I stood there, frozen, caught between the urge to know and the fear of what I might find. She called out from the living room. "Are you coming to sit with me, or are you just going to stand in the kitchen all night?" "Be right there," I said, grabbing a glass of water and walking into the other room. She was curled up on the couch, flipping through channels, her bare feet tucked beneath her. She looked so at ease, so normal. I sat down next to her, trying to match her casual demeanor, but my mind was miles away. "What do you want to watch?" she asked, handing me the remote. "Doesn't matter," I said, my voice sounding distant even to me. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been acting kind of, I don't know, distracted today." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just a lot on my mind." She nodded, leaning against me. "Well, whatever it is, I'm here if you want to talk about it." I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to ask her about the lipstick, about the napkin, about why she never wore that shade for me. But the words caught in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting, reading into something that didn't mean anything? What if bringing it up only caused more problems? So I stayed silent. I sat there with her, watching some mindless show on TV, pretending everything was fine. But inside, the doubt kept growing, wrapping itself tighter around me with each passing moment. I woke up the next morning still thinking about it. Her smile at breakfast had been as easy as ever, her conversation light and familiar. She talked about plans for the weekend, asked if we should finally tackle the garage cleanup we'd been putting off, but I could barely keep up. My thoughts were tangled, circling back to that napkin, that lipstick. The doubts were a quiet, constant hum, louder now that I'd spent another restless night replaying every small detail in my mind. I told myself I was making something out of nothing. The logical part of me tried to take control. Maybe it wasn't even hers. Maybe it had ended up in her purse by accident. How many times had I slipped receipts into the wrong pocket, found a business card I didn't remember taking? It could have been as simple as that. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't go away. I found myself watching her more closely. Every time she picked up her phone, I wondered if she was messaging someone I didn't know about. Every time she stepped out to run an errand or meet a friend, I felt a knot in my chest. I hated feeling this way, paranoid, suspicious. It wasn't who I was. I'd always trusted her. I never thought twice about where she went or who she saw. I never felt the need to check up on her, to ask too many questions. But now I couldn't stop myself. That afternoon, she mentioned she was meeting a friend for coffee. I nodded, said it sounded nice. She gave me a quick kiss and grabbed her purse, smiling as she headed out the door. As soon as I heard her car start, I sat down on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd just been. Why couldn't I let this go? The answer was simple, and I didn't want to admit it. I didn't trust her anymore. Not completely. Not the way I used to. That realization hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the napkin. It was about the possibility that the life we'd built, the bond one thought we shared, wasn't as solid as I believed. I needed to know the truth. I got up and paced the room, my thoughts spiraling. I wanted to ask her directly, but I didn't know how. I kept imagining how the conversation would go, what she'd say. Maybe she'd laugh it off, tell me I was being ridiculous. Maybe she'd admit something small but still significant. Or maybe she'd get angry, offended that I was questioning her at all. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to steady my breathing. I thought about calling a friend, someone I could confide in, someone who might give me a more objective perspective. But who would I even tell? None of my friends knew her the way I did. They'd probably tell me to stop overthinking, to trust her, to let it go. And I wanted to. I really did. But I couldn't. When she came back from coffee, she was all smiles. She placed a small brown bag on the counter and said, "I brought you a muffin. They had those chocolate ones you like." I thanked her, trying to match her tone, but I could hear the stiffness in my own voice. She noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "You've been acting different lately." "Nothing's wrong," I said too quickly. "Just stressed about work." She frowned, her eyes searching mine. "You can talk to me, you know. If something's bothering you, I want to help." I forced a smile and nodded. "Thanks. I'll let you know." She reached out and touched my arm, giving me a reassuring squeeze before heading upstairs. I watched her go, feeling a wave of guilt. She seemed so genuine, so open. Was I really going to bring up a lipstick stain on a napkin? Was I really going to let that one thing unravel everything we had? I told myself to wait, to give it time. Maybe if I just watched and listened, I'd find the answer without having to ask. Maybe she'd explain it herself. Or maybe I'd realize it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. But as the evening wore on and she sat beside me on the couch, laughing at a movie we'd seen a dozen times, I couldn't stop glancing at her lips. I couldn't stop thinking about that bright red mark, and how she'd never worn that color for me. I sat on the edge of the bed that night after she'd fallen asleep, staring at the floor. The room was dim, the glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds and painting faint stripes across the walls. I could hear her soft, steady breathing behind me, a sound that used to bring me comfort. Now it only reminded me how distant she felt, even as she lay just a few feet away. I reached for my phone, scrolling through old pictures of us. There we were on the trip to the lake, her face lit up with that genuine, unguarded laugh I loved. Another from a wedding we attended last spring, her hair pinned back, a gentle blush on her cheeks. But in every photo, the colors on her lips were muted, understated. Nothing close to that bright, daring red. Why was I so fixated on this? I asked myself for the 100th time. Why couldn't I just let it go? People change their minds about these things. Maybe she decided to try something new, then didn't like it. Maybe she wiped it off before I saw her that day. But if that were true, why the secrecy? Why hadn't she ever mentioned it? I set my phone down and looked at her purse on the chair by the dresser. I didn't want to be the kind of person who snooped through someone's belongings. I didn't want to go looking for something that might not even be there. But my mind was running circles around itself, and I felt like I was going mad. If I could just find a simple explanation, something to prove that it was all in my head, I could finally put it to rest. I got up slowly, careful not to wake her. I crossed the room, my heart pounding. The closer I got, the more my hands shook. When I reached the chair, I stood there for a moment, staring at the bag as if it might jump out at me. Finally, I took a deep breath, unzipped the pocket, and peeked inside. There it was, folded neatly in the corner, the same napkin with that same vivid red mark. It looked exactly as I remembered, untouched, as though it had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for me to notice it again. I stared at it, my chest tightening. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to laugh at myself, shove it back into the pocket, and never think about it again. But I couldn't. The fact that it was still there, exactly where I'd found it before, made the doubts in my mind scream even louder. If it was just a mistake, why hadn't she thrown it away? If it didn't matter, why was it still tucked away like a secret? I refolded the napkin carefully and placed it back in the pocket, zipping it up as quietly as I could. I returned to the bed and sat down again, my hands still trembling. My mind felt like it was pulling in two directions, one part of me trying desperately to believe her, to trust that there was a reasonable explanation, and another part convinced that something was deeply wrong. The hours ticked by as I sat there, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside and the rhythmic sound of her breathing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't rest. I couldn't escape the thought that there was more to this than a simple napkin, more to her story than she was willing to share. And I had no idea how to bring it up, how to confront her without turning everything upside down. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, I realized I had spent the entire night sitting there, waiting for an answer that never came. That evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the overhead light casting warm hues on her face. The meal was something simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine each. She seemed relaxed, content. She talked about her plans for the next day, laughing at some joke one of her co-workers had told her earlier. I nodded along, trying to keep up, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the napkin. I couldn't stop wondering why it was still there, folded so neatly in her purse. I didn't know how to bring it up, how to ask her without sounding accusatory, without revealing that I'd looked through her things. I felt stuck in a silent war with myself, unsure whether to trust my instincts or let it go. "Are you even listening?" she asked, giving me a playful nudge. Her smile was easy, her tone light, but I caught the faintest hint of something else. Concern, maybe? "Sorry," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm just a little out of it today." She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on the table. "You've been out of it for a while now. What's going on?" I hesitated, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "It's nothing, really. Just a lot on my mind." "Work stuff?" she pressed. "Something like that," I said, picking at my food. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to read me. "You can talk to me, you know. If something's bothering you, I want to help." I glanced at her, my stomach knotting. I wanted to tell her, to lay it all out and ask for an explanation. But my voice felt locked up, trapped beneath a tangle of doubt and fear. "It's fine," I said, pushing a smile onto my face. "I just need some sleep. I'll be okay." She watched me for a moment longer before nodding. "Okay. But if you change your mind." "Yeah," I said, cutting her off. "I'll let you know." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she let it go, turning the conversation back to something lighter. I nodded and smiled where appropriate, but the unease gnawed at me. I couldn't keep going like this, dodging her questions, pretending everything was normal. I needed answers. After dinner, we settled into our usual routine. She flipped through a magazine on the couch while I cleaned up the kitchen. I tried to focus on the task at hand, scrubbing plates and rinsing glasses, but my mind kept circling back to the same questions. Why was that napkin still in her bag? Why hadn't she mentioned it? Was I being paranoid, or was there something she wasn't telling me? I glanced into the living room, watching her for a moment. She was relaxed, completely at ease. It was hard to imagine that she could be hiding anything. Maybe I was making too much of it. Maybe I needed to just trust her. But every time I thought I'd convinced myself, that bright red lipstick stain would flash in my mind, and the doubt would come rushing back. Finally, I joined her on the couch, leaning back against the cushions. She looked over at me, her smile warm, and scooted closer. "Feel better now that the kitchen's clean?" she teased. "Yeah," I said, wrapping my arm around her. She nestled into my side, and for a while, we just sat there, the sound of the TV in the background. It felt normal, comfortable, even. But the weight in my chest didn't lift. As the evening wore on, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring it. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I needed to find a way to bring it up, to ask her about the lipstick, the napkin, all of it. I didn't know how she'd respond. I didn't know if I'd regret it. But I couldn't stay silent forever. I waited until the house was quiet again, long after she had gone upstairs and slipped into bed. I could hear her gentle breathing, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. The moonlight filtering through the blinds cast faint stripes across the walls, and I sat on the couch alone, my thoughts racing. This was it. I couldn't keep pushing it off, couldn't keep running through the same questions in my mind without answers. I walked upstairs, my steps heavy, and stood in the doorway of the bedroom. She shifted slightly, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into sleep. For a moment, I just watched her, the familiar curve of her face, the way her hair spilled across the pillow. It was the same face I'd fallen in love with, the same person I thought I knew better than anyone else. But then my eyes drifted to her purse on the chair by the dresser, and the knot in my stomach tightened again. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The air felt thick, and I struggled to steady my breathing. I reached out and touched her shoulder gently, my fingers trembling. "Hey," I said softly, trying not to startle her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she turned her head to look at me. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still heavy with sleep. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She sat up slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "I found a napkin in your purse. It had red lipstick on it. A shade I've never seen you wear." Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe, or guilt. She didn't answer right away. "You looked through my purse?" she asked, her voice quiet but tense. "It fell out," I said quickly. "I wasn't trying to go through your things, but when I saw it, I couldn't help wondering. I've never seen you wear that color before, so I need to know. What's going on?" She sat up fully now, pulling the blanket around her. "It's not what you think," she said. What do I think? I asked, my voice growing firmer. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's nothing, really. I tried it on once. I didn't like it. That's all. I guess I used the napkin to blot it off and forgot to throw it away. Her explanation was simple, almost dismissive. But the hesitation in her voice, the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, made it hard to believe. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why keep it to yourself? I didn't think it mattered, she said quickly. It was just one time, and I never wore it again. But it's still in your purse, I said. After all this time? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked down at her hands. I forgot it was there. Honestly, I did. I stared at her, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to accept that it was just an innocent mistake, that I was overthinking it. But the doubts had taken root too deeply. The way she spoke, the way she looked away, it all felt too carefully managed. Is that really all it is? I asked, my voice low. Because it's been bothering me for days, and I just need to know the truth. If there's more, just tell me now. She looked up at me then, her eyes glassy. It's nothing, she said again, almost pleading. I promise you, it's nothing. I sat back, running a hand over my face. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was searching for something that wasn't there. But even as I tried to convince myself, the uncertainty lingered. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely audible. She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm sorry if it made you feel like I was hiding something. I wasn't. I'll throw it out tomorrow, okay? I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. She smiled at me, her expression soft and warm, as if everything was back to normal. But as I lay down beside her, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unsaid. Something I might never fully understand.